Ever since the first big video game hit, sequels have been a guarantee. If your video game sells a ton within a small amount of time, the publisher has already basically signed away your soul to make a sequel to it as soon as possible. This has been true forever, but back in the days of arcades and the NES, sequels could be whatever they wanted to be. See, nowadays, our sequels are games like Spider-Man 2, expanding on what the first game did, continuing the story, but not doing anything crazy unique compared to the first game. Tears of the Kingdom expands on the original while introducing new mechanics that change things up a lot. However, it's still the same basic gameplay. Overwatch 2 and Counter-Strike 2 really changed things up by re-releasing the first games with less content, which was a big hit with consumers, and it's probably going to be the new industry standard. But if you go too far and swing too far in a different direction, it could spell doom. Look at Last of Us 2. I feel like if that game was the start of a series, it'd be beloved, but because of how it changed everything so harshly, people went nuts. However, with those old arcade and NES games, it didn't matter if you had a 2 at the end of your name. It was probably a completely different experience. Just look at something as simple as Donkey Kong Jr. Despite being a sequel to Donkey Kong, the gameplay is completely different. Same with Donkey Kong 3. Game developers were terrified that if things weren't shaken up, there would be no reason to buy a new game. Zelda 2 went from a top-down exploration game to a 2D platforming RPG. Castlevania went from a brutally hard 2D platformer to a weird, puzzle-driven, semi-open world RPG. And before you assume that they all became RPGs, look at Mario 2. It's a reskin of a completely different platforming game. Fire Emblem went from a map-to-map strategy game to a more simple, semi-strategy RPG with much more creative storytelling. Pac-Man 2. The Wild West of gaming never truly ended until the 16-bit era, where sequels mostly became what we know today, expansions on original games, continuing story, and improving gameplay. Except for Pac-Man 2, of course. Even games like Bubsy, which is awful, had a sequel that expanded and fixed certain things from the original. But whether you enjoyed an 8-bit game back then, or even today, you won't know if its sequel will be anything like what you just played. Enter Final Fantasy II. While it looks like a straight sequel, Square had that exact same fear of doing the same thing again, and created new gameplay, a heavy focus on story, and an entirely new leveling system. This was all not only incredibly off-putting back in the day, but was even more alienating when we finally got the game in the States. Everything felt so off compared to what was originally a baseline, simple RPG that anyone could enjoy. Despite this, the gameplay of Final Fantasy II would be refined into what we know today as the Saga series, beloved by hundreds in Japan and dozens in America. Despite its potentially misunderstood legacy as a bad game, has anything changed? After all, nowadays games like Mario 2 are respected and loved, and games like Gaiden are respected and loved by weirdos like me. Not only that, but similar to games like Gaiden or Metroid 2, Final Fantasy II has a remake on modern platforms. If games like Samus Returns and Fire Emblem Echo are anything to go by, perhaps the game can be seen in a new light. So, is Final Fantasy II truly a bad game? Is it truly a mess with awful systems and horrid grinding? Is it wholly, completely a mess that nobody should ever play no matter what platform it's released on? Yeah.